In the latter half of the 20th century, Alfa Romeo cemented its reputation as a car that, as the saying went, you could only catch with another Alfa Romeo. This reputation was forged not so much on the racetracks or in sales reports, but rather in the pages of the crime gazettes. In those years, an Alfa regularly featured in the news as the getaway car for audacious bank robbers or hitmen. It reached a point where the mere sight of one on the street would make passers-by freeze and hastily seek cover. The key model that cultivated this gangster image for the brand was the Giulia. Outwardly, this saloon might remind many of us of our native Soviet Kopeka, although, as we shall discover, it is rather the Kopeka that resembles the Giulia. And so I shall tell you the story of this Italian Lada.
The Giulia era is the story of Alfa Romeo's resounding success as a manufacturer of genuinely mass-market cars. It was the Giulia that, for the first time in the brand's history, crossed the 500,000-unit production threshold, an achievement that only a few subsequent models could replicate. But this triumph would have been impossible without the experience, at times painful, that the company gained with its predecessors, the 1900 and Giulietta models. It all began in 1950 with the four-door Alfa Romeo 1900 Saloon. This car was a revolution for the company. For the first time in its history, moving away from the small-batch production of exclusive cars, Alfa Romeo put a model on the assembly line. It was a bold move into the mass-market territory, where the giant Fiat reigned supreme. The monopolists' the action was understandable. In that same year of 1950, Alfa Romeo, having won the Formula One championship, was world famous, and in its native Italy, its name was on everyone's lips. And now, these national heroes, these idols of the racetrack, were encroaching on their home turf. Outrageous! As both companies were under state control, the brewing conflict was resolved from above. The verdict to find Alfa Romeo's development path for decades to come. The brand was to occupy a niche of more expensive and prestigious cars than Fiat. But Alfa was not to be deterred. In 1954, the Giulietta took to the stage. Another audacious provocation. This compact car with its 1.3-liter engine burst into the segment we would today call the C segment. And when in 1958, the larger Alfa Romeo 2000, effectively an E-segment car, replaced the 1900 model, a perfect void was created in the market hierarchy, an open D segment. It was precisely this spot that the Giulia filled in 1962. It was larger, more expensive, and more powerful than the nimble Giulietta, yet more accessible than the flagship 2000 model. The Italians played on this elegantly in the name. Giulietta is a young girl, while Giulia is her grown-up, more established version. Thus, a clever play on words subtly emphasized that the new car was a mature evolution of the ideas embodied in its popular predecessor.
When Alfa Romeo engineers began developing the new Giulia in 1959, they faced an exceedingly difficult task. Their creation had to surpass its predecessor, the Giulietta, which was not merely popular but a veritable sensation. Its production run of 170,000 units was a resounding success for the marque. How do you improve upon something that is already at the pinnacle of perfection? The classic Giulietta formula, a spirited four-cylinder engine, longitudinally mounted with rear-wheel drive, was deemed the benchmark. It was decided to retain this architecture, but to channel all engineering ingenuity into two areas that were revolutionary for the time: aerodynamics and safety. However, the Giulia could have taken a completely different path and become the first front-wheel drive Alfa Romeo. Its design owes much to a forgotten prototype, the Type 103, which was developed back in the 50s. This compact saloon, with a transversely mounted 900cc engine and front-wheel drive, was a stroke of genius. Had it seen the light of day, its layout would have predated the legendary Mini by 3 years. But instead of the production line, the concept was sent to a museum. And the reasons for this were not technical difficulties. The problem lay in backroom politics. Firstly, there was the gentleman's agreement with Fiat. The Turin-based industrial giant was far from thrilled at the prospect of Alfa Romeo, with its racing prestige, invading their budget car territory with such an advanced and potentially successful design. The second and decisive reason was Alfa Romeo's collaboration with Renault. Within the framework of the new European Economic Community, the state-owned car manufacturers of Italy and France had agreed to mutual production. Alfa Romeo began assembling the Renault Dauphine, and Renault, in turn, was preparing to produce the Giulietta. It is said that the hysterical outcry from Fiat's management, whose market was about to be entered by a direct competitor to their new Fiat 500, could be heard all over Italy. However, the agreement was political in nature, and Fiat could no longer influence it. In such a tense climate, instigating an internal revolution with front-wheel drive was simply too risky. Consequently, although the Giulia inherited many stylistic features from the Type 103, the shape of the windows, the distinctive stampings on the bonnet and boot lid, its body was designed from scratch. The guiding principles were science and safety. Every curve of its form was meticulously calibrated in the wind tunnel at the Polytechnic University of Turin. And in matters of safety, Alfa Romeo made a genuine breakthrough, developing a structural frame with programmed crumple zones. The chassis rails and load-bearing elements were designed to crumple on impact, absorbing energy and preventing deformation of the passenger cabin. Thus, by foregoing one revolution, Alfa became one of the first car manufacturers in the world to pay such close attention to passenger protection.
When the Giulia went on sale in 1962, journalists met it with merciless criticism. They found the design absurd. The rear was too chopped off, the roof too high, the silhouette too square. Added to this were complaints about poor sound insulation. But the storm of indignation subsided as quickly as it had begun, replaced by delight after the first serious road tests and clarifications from Alfa Romeo itself. In response to the mockery of its appearance, Alfa's engineers calmly presented the scientific facts. It turned out that the notorious square body was a masterpiece of aerodynamics. The truncated rear, a calm tail, ingeniously managed airflow separation, reducing turbulence and improving both performance and fuel consumption. The high glass house provided an excellent view out and made the cabin feel light and spacious. But the trump card was its drag coefficient, CD. It was almost the same as that of the streamlined Porsche 911. For a boxy saloon, this was a fantastic figure. By comparison, Audi would only achieve similar values 20 years later. Furthermore, the lightweight and incredibly rigid body, combined with a finely tuned chassis, a double wishbone front suspension, a live rear axle with trailing arms, and anti-roll bars, allowed the car to practically dance through the corners. And although the first versions were fitted with drum brakes, these soon gave way to all-round discs. However, the decisive argument that silenced all skeptics was its performance. Under the bonnet of the first Giulia purred a modified engine from the Giulietta, an inline four-cylinder unit with a 1.6-liter capacity. It was a true masterpiece, an aluminum block and cylinder head, twin chain-driven overhead camshafts, and a twin-choke Solex carburetor. With the car weighing just a ton, it produced 96 horsepower and 130 Nm of torque. Paired with a 5-speed gearbox, a rarity for the era, this allowed the saloon to accelerate to 100 km per hour, 62 miles per hour, in 15.6 seconds, and reach a top speed of 165 km per hour, 103 miles per hour. Many cars with much larger engines could only dream of such performance. The first saloons bore the TI index, Turismo Internazionale.
Amusingly, on its predecessor, the Giulietta, this suffix denoted a sporty trim level, whereas on the Giulia, it came to signify the base model. Its interior was finished in vinyl, and the dashboard had a trapezoidal shape. But the main curiosity was the front seating, a three-person bench seat with the gear lever on the steering column. This was a strange nod to the American market, which, fortunately, was soon abandoned, returning the lever to its rightful place on the floor. The Giulia's racing potential was obvious, and as early as 1963, Alfa Romeo released the homologation special TI Super to compete in the European Touring Car Championship. Then, in 1965, a road-going model based on it was launched, which would become a legend, the Giulia Super. Sold alongside the base TI, it was its more luxurious and powerful counterpart. The changes were in the detail of the trim, but the real magic was hidden within. Improved suspension and an engine tuned to 98 horsepower with 2 Weber carburetors turned the saloon into a proper rocket. The 0 to 100 km per hour time was cut to 11.6 seconds, and the top speed increased to 177 km per hour, 110 miles per hour. After the base TI was discontinued in 1967, a niche opened up between the affordable 1.3-liter model and the premium Super. In 1968, an attempt was made to fill it with the 1600S version, but it failed spectacularly. In terms of equipment, the car was barely distinguishable from the junior model, merely offering a more powerful engine at an inflated price. Italians saw no point in such a purchase. They either saved money by choosing the 1.3 or paid the extra for the splendid Super. The result was a mere 2,200 cars sold over 2 years. In those years, the Giulia's main rivals were considered to be the BMW 1600 and 1800, the Lancia Flavia, the Ford Escort, and the Fiat 1500. Some of them were more powerful, others in a higher class, but on the road, none could catch the Giulia.
In the end, the Alfa Romeo Giulia Super became the perfect car for its time. It offered explosive performance, finely honed handling, a spacious and stylish interior, and, most importantly, its price was more than competitive. This recipe for success was duly appreciated by 125,000 Italians who opted for this specific version. Among them, unfortunately, were also those who saw in the car's virtues the potential for their own dark deeds. For criminal syndicates and the mafia, the Giulia was a real godsend. Its cabin could comfortably accommodate a crew of 5, and its enormous 430-liter boot could, if necessary, fit an undesirable 6th. The powerful engine allowed it to outrun any pursuit, while the model's incredible popularity on the roads gave gangsters the perfect camouflage, allowing them to dissolve into the flow of traffic. Soon, the Carabinieri and the police were left with no choice. To stand any chance of catching criminals in Giulias, they had to switch to Giulias themselves. The car became a double agent. It was used simultaneously to flee from the law and to administer justice. This image completely shattered any hopes of a reputation as a respectable family saloon. Alfa Romeo had never been a favorite among housewives, but after the crime wars of the 1960s, the marque had to spend decades scrubbing the black marks from its record. However, during those troubled times of mafia feuds, it wasn't just the clans and the police who suffered. During the Second Mafia War, which engulfed Sicily and southern Italy, a wave of terrorist attacks swept through the cities. Cars began to explode in the streets. They were packed with bombs, turned into deadly weapons to eliminate rivals. And although the shadow of these events fell upon the entire brand, the Mafia did not choose the new Giulia for its infernal machines. Their weapon of choice was its predecessor, the small and plentiful Giulietta. Over several years, more than 100 of these cars were blown up. It is difficult to imagine the damage these attacks inflicted not only on society, but also on the image of Alfa Romeo, whose latest model, the Giulia, was only just entering the market.
In 1964,
By introducing the Giulia with a 1.3-liter engine, Alfa Romeo once again rewrote the rules in the four-door saloon class. The new Giulia 1300 replaced the legendary Giulietta TI, which was retired that same year. But while the engineers had refined the engine for the senior 1.6-liter version, the junior model inherited its engine directly from the heart of the Giulietta. This modest single-carburetor unit developed a mere 78 horsepower, but that proved sufficient for it to become the fastest in its class once again. The sprint to 100 kilometers per hour, 62 miles per hour, took around 15 seconds, and its top speed exceeded 160 kilometers per hour, 99 miles per hour. Its main competitor in the market was the Fiat 1300. However, the gentleman's agreement between the two companies remained in effect, so the Alfa was positioned higher. Priced at 1,375,000 lire, the Giulia 1300 was almost 200,000 lire more expensive than the Fiat, but 250,000 lire cheaper than its own 1.6-liter stablemate. To justify this price step, Alfa resorted to disarming the junior model. The Giulia 1300 lost its famous twin headlamps, 5-speed gearbox, and some of its chrome trim. Initially, Italians, who had been waiting for a compromise between the everyman's Fiat and the aristocratic Giulietta, snapped up the newcomer like hotcakes. Yet over 8 years, only 28,000 cars were sold, a pale result compared to the much more expensive Giulia Super. The reason was simple. The main demand for the base version was concentrated in its first 2 years. As early as 1966, the Giulia 1300 Ti entered the scene, instantly overshadowing its predecessor and becoming a true legend. Firstly, it was one of the first saloons in the world to receive a 5-speed gearbox paired with a 1.3-liter engine. Secondly, its engine was tuned to 82 horsepower, which cut the 0 to 100 kilometers per hour time to an impressive 12.8 seconds. And thirdly, its more luxurious interior trim and improved sound ventilation made it incomparably more attractive. It was this version that buried the unsuccessful 1600S, which had identical equipment but cost more. In that same year of 1966, a formidable new rival entered the ring, the Fiat 124, the future Soviet Kopeka. On closer inspection, they had a surprising amount in common: a square-bodied shape, a similar front-end design as if it were drawn with a nod to the Alfa, almost identical dimensions, a classic rear-wheel drive layout, and disc brakes all round. But the devil was in the detail. Fiat never had a 1.3 engine, only a 1.2 or 1.4. And even when compared with Fiat's larger-engined version, the Alfa Romeo was always more powerful, faster, and more thrilling to drive. Thanks to its low price, the Fiat 124 became an absolute bestseller, with more than 1.5 million units sold. The Giulia 1300 Ti could not even dream of such numbers, but it secured another more important victory. By outselling all other variants, it became the most popular and beloved version in the Giulia family. In 1970, Alfa Romeo made one last desperate attempt to catch Fiat by releasing a version with an 89 horsepower twin carburetor engine. But no miracle occurred. Having sold around 80,000 units, this modification only confirmed that the Giulia and the Fiat were playing in different leagues. Fiat conquered the market, while the Giulia conquered hearts.
The early 70s marked the beginning of a dark chapter for Alfa Romeo. The company found itself at the epicenter of a perfect storm: financial difficulties exacerbated by a revolving door of management and the oil crisis that struck in 1973. Compounding this was a rapidly aging model range. Competitors had moved on, and even sales of the once universally adored Giulia were in relentless decline. As painful as it was to admit, its time was coming to an end. A new model was being prepared to replace it, for which it was decided to revive the celebrated Giulietta name. But its launch, scheduled for 1973, was postponed indefinitely due to technical flaws and the aforementioned crisis. Thus, fate gave the Giulia a second chance. In 1974, a facelifted model was launched under the name Giulia Nuova Super. As before, 1300 and 1600 versions were offered,
But now they were not two spiritually different cars, but practically twins with common trim, identical looks, and the same engine architecture, differing only in displacement. In essence, Alfa Romeo simply kept the popular super trim in the lineup, letting customers choose only the engine size. The update was purely cosmetic. The Nuova Super received a smoothed-off bonnet, a new radiator grille, new bumpers, and a revised rear end. Inside, the car gained headrests, a different instrument panel, and a center console. The mechanical underpinnings, however, remained completely unchanged. Even the claimed 102 horsepower for the 1.6-liter engine was not new. It had reached that figure back in 1969. The fate of the Giulia Nuova Super was sealed. It became a stopgap measure, a soldier left to hold the line until reinforcements arrived in the form of the new Giulietta. It could have quietly lived out its days selling a few thousand units a year, were it not for one detail that came as a genuine shock to many of the marque's fans. In 1976, under pressure from the government, which was hiking taxes on petrol due to the oil crisis, Alfa Romeo fitted the Giulia with a diesel engine. This was a decision born of desperation. The company's warehouses had accumulated a large number of diesel engines from the British firm Perkins, purchased for its F-12 vans. It was these that they decided to implant under the bonnet of the legendary saloon. Needless to say, this was a desecration of the sporting spirit of Alfa. The engine, which weighed as much as a cast-iron bridge, produced a paltry 50 horsepower. It was only thanks to the lightweight body and refined aerodynamics that this car could reach a top speed of 138 kilometers per hour. It set the only record of being the first diesel saloon in Alfa Romeo's history. This version sold just about as well as it drove, which is to say, not at all. The diesel experiment was the final straw. In 1977, the last Giulia rolled off the production line. Its era was over, and it was replaced, as planned, by the more modern Giulietta. But as one of the company's directors would later say, the Giulia era was the golden age of post-war Alfa Romeo, and it is hard to argue with that.
The Giulia went down in history as one of the first compact saloons to combine practicality with unprecedented power. But it wouldn't be a true Alfa Romeo if its story were limited to civilian success alone. A racer's heart beat within its angular body, and that could not go unnoticed. As previously mentioned, the 1962 saw the birth of the Giulia TI Super, not just a modified version, but an uncompromising weapon created with a single purpose: to win the European Touring Car Championship. According to homologation rules, to compete, a car manufacturer was obliged to produce and sell at least 500 road-going cars with racing specifications. Alfa Romeo scrupulously met this requirement, producing exactly 501 examples, one extra just to be sure. Externally, this version was easily recognizable by the symbol of Alfa's racing glory, the four-leaf clover, or Quadrifoglio. Legend has it that this charm first appeared on the car of a very fast but chronically unlucky driver. Before a race, he found a clover and asked for it to be painted on the side of his car. The charm worked. The race was won, and the Quadrifoglio became the permanent emblem for the fastest Alfa Romeos. Besides the logo, the TI Super was distinguished by its asceticism. Almost all 501 cars were painted white, and in place of the inner main beam headlamps were mesh grills for better engine cooling. But the most significant changes were hidden within. The car was ruthlessly lightened. The side and rear windows were replaced with perspex, everything unnecessary was stripped from the cabin, and magnesium alloy wheels reduced the unsprung mass. The suspension was lowered and retuned, and the engine was boosted to 112 horsepower, allowing the saloon to reach an incredible 189 kilometers per hour or 117 miles per hour. Despite all this, the saloon did not have an outstanding racing career.
It won a few races and frequently appeared on the podium, but it never became a legend, ceding that role to its relative, the Giulia GT Coupe. Today, however, the TI Super is a true collector's diamond. It is rumored that no more than 50 cars have survived worldwide, and their price at auction can reach as high as $60,000. In addition to circuit racing, the Giulia left its mark on rallying and autocross, primarily through the efforts of privateer teams. One of the most exotic versions was the Giulia 1600 Rally, produced in South Africa. Around 100 of these cars were made, equipped with 1.6 and even 2-liter engines. In effect, this was the only 2-liter Giulia saloon. Like the TI Super, it had a lightened body, uprated brakes and suspension, and was predominantly painted red. And while on the subject of exclusives, it's worth mentioning the versions that officially never existed. The Giulia estate cars. Alfa itself never produced them, they were the product of coach-building firms. Around 16 Giulia Super saloons were converted into estates by a Milanese company and used by Alfa Romeo itself as support vehicles at races and as parts vans for its dealerships. A few more special versions for the traffic police were built by the coach builder Giorgetti. These exceptionally rare cars add a unique flourish to the rich biography of this legendary model.
The Giulia is not just a car, it is an integral part of Italian culture, a star of 60s and 70s cinema, the soundtrack to an entire generation. With its first Giulia, Alfa Romeo set the bar so high that its success could only be surpassed by its distant successor, the 156. But even here, it's not so straightforward. For the true fans, the Alfisti, the front-wheel drive 156 was no longer the one. In their circles, it is widely held that the last true Alfa died with the 75 model. By the early 2010s, things at Alfa Romeo were going from bad to worse. Then again, when were they ever going well? The model range was utterly depressing. Showrooms contained only the nimble Mito hatchback and the revived Giulietta. Alas, this was not the rebellious rear-wheel drive saloon of old, but a well-made yet soulless front-wheel drive hatchback, of which there are plenty in Europe. It sold, but it failed to inspire awe, and the huge loan taken out for its development hung like a millstone around the company's neck. And then, standing on the edge of the abyss, Alfa Romeo did what it does best. It went all in. The company took out another colossal loan and threw all its resources into developing a completely new platform. On this platform, they resurrected not just a name, but an entire philosophy. They resurrected the Giulia. Of course, the gangster's favorite from the 60s and today's Giulia are two different worlds. But the idea, the concept forged into their metal remains the same: to create the fastest, most thrilling, and most desirable saloon in its class. Unveiled in 2015, the second-generation Giulia was a revelation. New hearts beat under the bonnet. A 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder with up to 280 horsepower, and of course, a ferocious 2.9-liter twin-turbo V6 derived from Ferrari. This engine, producing up to 540 horsepower, could fire the saloon from 0 to 62 miles per hour in under 4 seconds with the same ease its ancestor used to evade any pursuit. Just as they had over half a century before, the engineers focused on handling and aerodynamics. An active differential, double wishbone front suspension, and a multi-link rear with perfect 50-50 weight distribution. Alfa Romeo once again dared to challenge the German titans on their home turf, the Nürburgring. A wide range of versions, from the elegant Super to the monstrous Quadrifoglio and GTA, allowed everyone to find their own Giulia. But the world had changed. It was asking for crossovers, and Alfa Romeo gave it a masterpiece of engineering. Alas, sales flopped. By 2020, fewer than 100,000 cars had been sold in Europe and the US, and in August 2021, the death knell sounded. The Stellantis group announced that the entire Alfa Romeo lineup would transition to electric power. This means that the current Giulia is the last of its kind, the last real Alfa with a roaring heart under its bonnet. There will be no others like it. The world is changing, and the roar of a V6 is inevitably giving way to the whisper of electric motors. But for those who understand, a true Alfa Romeo is defined not by its fuel, but by the passion it ignites. And in that sense, the Giulia is immortal. It was and will remain a magnificent, heartfelt farewell to an entire century of petrol, oil, and pure, unadulterated delight.